Go, action. Okay. We're in the Jurong Christian Church now. We're seated in the roofs, I guess they call it the Remembrance Chapel. It's on the top of this of the new Jurong Church building, and it reminds us of the first church building that was built, because the cross that's in this building was the cross that was in the sanctuary of the first building. This church, we saw the Lutheran Church saw the success of the Queenstown Lutheran Church, and so it was determined we would follow the pattern of building similar churches in housing estates as they were developed. And this was a very turbulent time in Singapore. 1965, they're becoming independent, and no one knew exactly what was going to happen here. Jurong was the industrial estate where the government was encouraging multinational companies to come in, start their factories here. And so was this going to be a success or not? So the Housing Development Board again made a religious site available here in Jurong. At the Council of Churches, we talked about this, and the churches were all interested in building here, but no one knew exactly what was going to happen in Singapore, whether it was going to be a success or not, now that it was independent from Malaysia and so on. But I said, well, I talked with George Frock, who was our business manager at that time, and George and I agreed, well, if Jurong is not a success, it doesn't make any difference. Singapore will go down the drain. Jurong has to be a success. So let's go ahead and put our effort into helping Jurong be a success by bidding for the church there. So the other churches and the Council of Churches agreed to support us. The Anglican Church, the Presbyterian Church, and the Methodist Church. And they agreed to support our bid for the tender for this property. And we were successful in getting the property, and then we went ahead, got the same architect, Edwin Chun, to design the church that would have be multiple functional, have a lot of area besides the worship center, area for different programs. And so this church then was built, and it was completed in 1968, June of 1968, it was dedicated. And at that time, there already was a congregation. If you see from this picture here, it shows the young people gathered there. And if you can kind of see behind them, you see the roof, the skyline there of shop houses. Well, that was right across the street here from the church. And we were going to have ministry in this area, so we had rented one of those shop houses there. And Paul Chong was an evangelist from our Lutheran Church in Malaysia at that time. He lived upstairs there, and he started work. And Reverend Daniel Nelson, who was a Swedish missionary that was working with us, he was here. He was assigned to work together with Paul Chong. And then we're very fortunate to get from America a young woman by the name of Anita Ewing, who was a teacher of home economics in the United States. To get her to come to work with young women here. There were lots and lots of young people here working in the factories. Many of them had come down from Malaysia. They were not Singaporeans, but they'd come to Singapore to work in the factories. So they were, in the evening time, they would just be walking around or gathering around, and the church gave them an opportunity to gather together. And so Anita, she started English classes. Here's this picture, English classes, sewing classes, cooking classes, and we had the taekwondo classes. This followed somewhat the same pattern of ministry that we had in Queenstown, kind of being a community center for everybody around to come here and to have different ministries, programs that they could relate to, and then through that, the church would become acquainted with these people. Some of these young people coming from Malaysia, of course, were Christian. They were members of churches in Malaysia. So a Christian youth fellowship formed quite early, and this ministry was very big here in Jurong. We had a lot of young people in that ministry. So there was also a kindergarten program as we had in others, and this was the only kindergarten in this area, and so it had a lot of students were involved in that. In the initial building, in fact, when we had the groundbreaking, the bishop of the Methodist Church, Robert Lundy, took part in the groundbreaking. He was here, took part, and an Anglican priest by the name of James Wong, who later became a canon at St. Andrew's Cathedral, he took part in the groundbreaking. And we did not name it the Lutheran Church. We called it the Jurong Christian Church. The idea was that anybody who was a Christian could become a member of the congregation without becoming a Lutheran. They could become a full member of the congregation, but they didn't need to be, they could remain Methodist or Anglican priests. The Methodists seconded a pastor to work in this church 3 days a week, and James Wong was seconded by the Anglican Church to work here with the ministry. So it was an ecumenical, started out as an ecumenical ministry with the other churches supporting. Actually, the Methodist Church, through Dr. Lundy, gave some thousands of dollars for the building fund. I can't remember how much it was, but it was substantial. We also got money from Bread for the World, which was a German program that was interested in community development and doing community work. And because a part of the church was going to be used for the community development work, Bread for the World was willing to give some funds to help build the church. So it was really a different kind of project than Queenstown. Here we had other churches and other ecumenical groups joining with us to build this church. So the church council was made up of not only of Lutherans, but of Anglicans, Methodists, and Martoma Syrian. They all were experienced churchmen. And so this church had an advantage of having, over Queenstown, in that it had some older church leadership in it when the congregation started. So it was like that. Both the English and the Mandarin congregations were the same. There was a lot of good leadership coming into the church from others. And of course, anybody that became a Christian here, was baptized here, would become a Lutheran. They would then be in the Lutheran church. So in the beginning, of course, the Lutherans weren't the biggest group, but eventually they did become the largest group. Interesting thing on this picture here, you see, this was one of the confirmation classes, confirmation services that was held here in the church. And if you'll notice, there's the Anglican bishop is there, and also the Anglican priest, and then myself. This class was made up of 8 young people. 2 of them, their family were from the Martoma Christian Church. 2 of them were from the Anglican Church. 1 girl was from the Presbyterian Church. 1 girl was a Hindu. She didn't have any Christian background. And then there was one of our daughters in it. So that was the class. The class was made up of that group. Now, both the Anglican and Martoma Syrian accepts the Anglican bishop as their bishop. They always have the bishops do the confirmation services. So when we were ready to, I had instructed these young people in the catechism class for a year, and then they were going to be confirmed. So we invited Chu Bannett, the Anglican bishop, to come and do the confirmation services. So they were all confirmed by Chu Bannett. So this whole group, 2 of them were Anglicans, 2 of them were Martoma Syrians, 1 Presbyterian, 1 Lutheran, and 1 Hindu who was baptized and then confirmed at that time. And so this showed the ecumenical participation and cooperation, and the church grew rapidly in that because of that. It's interesting to note that this Hindu girl that was confirmed there, her name was Pushpa, and she became very active in the church, and later she was working with the Anglican Church in some of their ministries here, and then they had called her to go as a missionary to Thailand. But they told Pushpa, they said, well, if you're going to represent the Anglican Church, then you have to be an Anglican to be confirmed. She said, well, she thought she remembered she had been confirmed by the Anglican bishop. So they looked at the records at St. Andrew's Cathedral, And sure enough, there was there, Chu Bannett, that was the bishop of the Anglican Church at that time, had confirmed her, and so she was already on their record, on their rolls as an Anglican. And so she didn't have to go through any kind of a service or anything to become an Anglican. And then she went as a missionary to Thailand, and she still is serving like that. These other boys, one of the Anglican boys, their surname was Christian. Their father's name was Christian. And one of them went to seminary, and when he finished seminary, was working with the Lutheran Church as a pastor, and he decided to go on his own to Indonesia, and he started a ministry in Indonesia with a children's home and a school and that, and he's still carrying that on as it's an independent Christian ministry there in Indonesia, and he's still doing that. The boys from the Martoma Church, they also were leaders in the Martoma Christian Church here in Singapore. So I think, as an ecumenical group. So they were taught the catechism as Lutherans, but they were confirmed as Anglicans. And we had that story. So that was kind of a story of the Jurong Christian Church. And it had a similar pattern to the Queenstown Church, with a big community, as big, broad ministry of social ministries to the community, with the class, all different kinds of classes, from the kindergarten children all the way up to adults. And so, like the Queenstown Church, there were hundreds of people coming through to this church for different programs every day. And the pastors relating to them and following up, and the evangelists inviting them to church, where they became members and became active in the church. So this is the story of the Jurong Christian Church. Today, this church has been rebuilt and what the Singapore government likes to call a hub church, where they have more than one denomination sharing the same building. When the Jurong Church was going to rebuild, then the government, or through the government, they learned of this idea of having a hub church. And so the government has given approval that this could be a hub church. So in the churches that was rebuilt, there are 3 different denominations that contribute to the building, and each of them have a certain space in the building that is their own, for their own use, but then some spaces are shared. Some of the areas are shared. They don't necessarily come under the Lutherans or the Methodists or someone else, but they are that. So it's been rebuilt like that. And this little chapel that we're in then is on the top of the church. They made that, and they preserved the cross from the original church, the pews out of the original building.
The brick walls.
Yeah, the brick walls. We had just brick walls, and the other was in the original building like that. And so we have that. We have this connection with what was here. How long ago was that? 35, 40 years ago. Yeah, it's like that. So, and again, it's an ideal location. As the Queenstown Church, you can see, you go outside and you look around, all you see are apartment buildings surrounding the church building. Hundreds, thousands of people that are right around this church. The church is the center, and with it can reach out with the good news to all of these people that are here.
I remember the active youth group. A lot of them were from Malaysia, and they loved music, as youth do, and singing with their guitars. And sometimes they would come to our house. But I remember specifically one time I had to have an operation, so I was in Glen Eagles Hospital, and the youth group came with their guitars and sat around on the floor and sang to me while I was recovering from my surgery. They were a very active and very dedicated group of young people.
One of the ministries I had, not only here, but in the other churches where I served, was the Bethel Bible Series. Mm-hmm. It's an adult Bible study. That's a 2-year Bible study. It takes 2 years. We have classes 2 hours each week. You have to have 100. If you're in the class, you have to attend 100% of the time, or you're out. If you miss a class, you're out. We have examinations, so the teacher knows you're learning the material we're talking about. We had a Bethel Bible Series class here. Well, we had several, but the first one we started, we had some of the young people were on shift work in their factories. So they would miss a class. So if they missed a class at night, I would always have the same lesson the next morning. The next morning, in the mid-morning, then they could come and they could get the lesson just like it had been taught the night before, so they'd keep up. And we had that class. I had 28 in that class. All of them had 100% attendance, and they all passed within 80% of their examinations to get the Bethel Bible Series certificate. They really loved to learn the Bible. They were just so willing and anxious to learn the Bible. We had several other classes here, a marriage enrichment class, where we had a class that I taught, was about a 6-week class, and we would teach about different things in marriage. One class was about men, so the women could understand men. One class was about women, so the men could understand women, how they were thinking, because of thought pattern. And one was about money, finances. One was about relatives, parents and so on, so that the marriages could be stronger together. And then after the class was finished, we had a marriage vow renewal ceremony. Some of those that were in the class as husband and wife, some of them had become Christians after they were married. So they had never had a marriage as a Christian couple. So we had this marriage renewal ceremony where they came and everyone then, they exchanged their vows. It was very, very meaningful for everyone, but especially for those couples that had not had the privilege of having a Christian marriage. And then we had that. So we had those classes like that a lot. And here in Jurong, the attendance seemed to be very good because I think everybody lived in this area, and they came to it. So the classes were here. And Jurong Christian Church is still one of the strong Lutheran congregations. Now they have a ministry relate to the seafarers because of the Jurong port, and so they have a strong ministry from this congregation relating to the Jurong seafarers, especially those that are fishermen at the port here, at the Jurong port. And we could see when we came in the many children leaving the kindergarten. They have a state-of-the-art kindergarten here. This is the best kindergarten that I've seen in Singapore that they have here in the Jurong Christian Church. I guess that's about all I want to say about this church, huh? We sing the song, The Old Rugged Cross. I remember the old rugged cross. This cross looks like a rugged cross. This cross has quite a history, as I mentioned earlier. When the church was built in 1968 and they were ready to dedicate the church, in the sanctuary there was the cross that they had intended to have on the altar wasn't there, and they wanted to have a cross on the wall. So one of the members of the congregation then went outside and got these pieces of wood this was the wood that was used for the scaffolding on the sides of the building when they would plaster the building or do the brickwork. And there was a lot of these were still lying around because the church had just been built. So he cut these and then he tied them together with this bamboo there that they used to hold them together. And that cross then was hung in the sanctuary of the first church. When they rebuilt this church as a hub church, then they saved the cross and they kept it to put it here in this top chapel. And so we have that cross from there. So it gives a connection with the original building and the original members of the congregation that were here and inspired by God to provide for this church. And then we go out, we could see also they saved from the original building the dedication plaques that were put there to say when the church was dedicated. And these are the plaques that are put here. This tablet commemorates the opening of the Jurong Christian Church, July 28, 1968, built to the glory of God for the Jurong community. And I think that really expresses, it was built for the community. It was really a community center for the church. And see this. I love these plaques, huh? So again, we have them in 3 languages. We have English, we have the Mandarin, and we have the Bahasa. So you can see the 3 different languages. Everybody can read that and relate to it. And this was Jurong Church. And this church was really one that was built on faith. No one knew exactly what was going to happen in Singapore back at these years, And Jurong had to be a success for Singapore to be a success. And so we threw our lot in with the Singapore government. And we see that idea that this was open to the community, to serve the community, and for the spreading of the good news of God's love for people through their Savior, Jesus Christ. And so we had that to remember the opening of the church and the dedication of it at that time. So this is very good to maintain this, to keep it on this rooftop chapel as a remembrance. Now it's on this side of the church, they have a nice garden of remembrance here. You can see they have a statue there of small statue of Martin Luther. This was given to the Lutheran Church in Singapore by the Bavarian Lutheran Church. In 2017, they celebrated the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. And at that time, this statue of Martin Luther was given to the Singapore Church here, so we could read. Yeah, 1517 was, so it was 2017. So 500th anniversary. And of course, you got a beautiful, with the cross there behind the garden. Again, these are some of the original pews that were in the first church that was built here. So they're still in use up here. People can sit in them and have a time of prayer and worship. We had, and I spoke about earlier about the church started in the shop house across the street from the church building. And on this picture with these young people in front of the church, you can see the shop house, the second floor of the shop houses that were right across on that side of the road. Now those shop houses, of course, are not there, and now it's high-rise apartment buildings all on that side of the road. But on that shop house across the street, that's where Paul Chong, Anita Ewing, and Daniel Nelson started the ministry for the Jurong Christian Church, right across the street there. So, and then you can see the people are the buildings all around the church. Anywhere, any direction you look, it's apartment buildings.
It's such a joy for us to be able to come back to Singapore every year and to see how God is continuing to work in all the Lutheran churches here and the way He has used all the people in the churches for His different ministries. And we are truly thankful and so blessed that He called us to Malaysia and Singapore for the ministry here. And we give all praise and honor and glory to God for His wonderful love for us.
Yes, it's great to walk here on the roof of this church and to remember all of those who know Jesus as their Savior through this church, through the ministry that's gone on here all of these years, and to see how it has grown and developed and expanded for the glory of God. What a beautiful testimony it is to God's great love and His providence for His people. So much has happened here that has helped people down through the years. What a great blessing it is to the people of Jurong to have this church.